He bought the 18-year-old virgin bride for $3, but she screamed when the cowboy knelt. The barn smelled of old hay, sweat, and despair. Sunlight knifed through gaps in the siding and laid dusty bars across the rough platform where Allora Calloway stood. 18 years old, barefoot, ankles rubbed raw by cracked leather straps. Her dress, her mother's, one sky blue, now the color of ash, hung loose on her thin frame, the hem dragging in dirt. Bruises bloomed along her arms like spilled ink. She kept her eyes on a knothole in the plank beneath her feet and waited for the voices to decide her price. Unclaimed bride, virgin stock. The auctioneer drawled, spitting tobacco into the straw. Healthy enough. Quiet. Start at $3. Laughter rippled to the crowd of sunburned men. $3 for a life. No one moved. The auctioneer lifted his gavel, impatient. Going once. A shadow detached itself from the back wall. Tall, lean, hat brim low. Cole Jarrett stepped into the light, boots silent on the packed earth. He didn't raise his voice. He simply opened a small leather pouch, let 3 coins fall into his palm, and laid them on the block. 3, he said. The barn went still. Someone snorted. Someone else cursed under his breath. The auctioneer shrugged, banged the gavel once, and jerked his chin toward the girl. She's yours, Jarrett. Take your bargain and get. Cole walked forward. Men stepped aside without thinking. He stopped 2 paces from the platform and dropped to one knee in the dirt, slow and deliberate. Allora's breath caught. She braced for hands, for claiming. Instead, he reached for the straps around her ankles. His fingers were callous but careful, loosening the stiff leather and easing away from the broken skin. When the last strap fell, he stayed on his knee and looked up at her, not at her body but at her eyes. I claim nothing, he said, loud enough for every man to hear. Then, softer, you don't belong to them, and you don't belong to me. I just bought your silence from monsters. He stood, unbuttoned his coat, worn wool, smelling of pine smoke and horse, and draped it over her shoulders. It swallowed her, without another word. He walked out through the open doors into blinding late-afternoon sun. Allora stood a moment longer, barefoot on the platform, the coat warm around her. Then she stepped down and followed because the dirt outside felt less like a cage than the barn ever had. He didn't look back. The wagon waited, the mare flicking her tail. Cole climbed to the seat, gathered the reins, and stared straight ahead. Allora hesitated at the wheel. He said nothing. She climbed beside him. The wagon lurched forward toward the mountains as the sun bled orange across the plains. They rode in silence. The wind cooled. Pines began to close around the trail, carrying their sharp, clean scent. When full dark came, stars pressed close overhead. Cole lit no lantern. The mare knew the way. The cabin sat in a small clearing, logs silvered by weather, roof low and sturdy. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, though the night was mild. Cole set the brake, stepped down, and only then glanced at her. You can come in, he said, or you can keep walking. Road goes both directions. Inside, the single room smelled of coffee and wood smoke. A fire crackled low. There were no locks on the door, no bars on the windows. A narrow bed stood in one corner, a patched quilt spread across it. A rocking chair faced the hearth. On a shelf, tiny carved birds, sparrows, wrens, a single hawk, watched with painted eyes. Cole ladled stew into a tin bowl, set on the table with a spoon and half a loaf of soda bread. He pointed to the bed. That's yours tonight. I'll take the chair. She ate standing up, afraid to sit. When she finished, he handed her a blanket warm from the hearth. She wrapped it around herself and sat on the floor near the fire, knees drawn up. Cole banked the flames, settled into the rocker with his hat over his eyes, and slept, or pretended to. Snow came in the night, soft as forgiveness. Days passed like that. He rose before dawn, fed the mare, chopped wood. He left coffee on the hearth and cornbread wrapped in cloth. He spoke, when spoken to, nevermore. The first morning she woke to find a pair of soft moccasins by the bed, deerskin, simply beaded. They fit. One evening she stood at the doorway, watching him split kindling. The axe rose and fell in steady rhythm. She stepped outside, barefoot again because the moccasins felt too fine to soil. He paused, resting the axe on his shoulder. "I could learn," she said, voice rusty. He nodded once and handed her the axe. It was heavier than it looked. The first swing glanced off the log and jarred her teeth. He didn't laugh. He stood behind her, not touching, adjusted her grip with 2 fingers, showed her the arc. "You're not broken," he said quietly. "You were bought." That's not the same thing. With chips flew. Her palms blistered, then toughened. Another morning, he found her struggling with her hair, tangled from sleep and mountain wind. She had no comb, no ribbon. He hesitated, then sat on the bench and motioned her to the floor. She went stiff. He waited. After a long moment, she sat. His fingers worked slowly, parting the dark mass, braiding it with the same patience he used carving birds. When he finished, he tied the end with a strip of rawhide and said nothing more. Winter loosened its grip. Snow melted into the creek, loud with runoff. One afternoon, he carried a trunk from the loft and opened it with care. Inside lay folded dresses, small boots, a child's bonnet yellow with age. "My sister's," he said. "She was about your size before the fever took her, and my brother-in-law left me their boy." He lifted out a dress the color of fresh cream, embroidered with tiny flowers. Held it out. Allora took it with reverent fingers. That night she buried her mother's gray rag behind a woodshed and dug the hole deep with the same axe she now swung without fear. Caleb arrived with the first green shoots, 6 years old, all elbows and missing teeth, carrying the arms of a neighbor who'd kept him through winter. The boy took one look at Allora and decided she was his. He tugged her sleeve, demanded she admire his pine cones, insisted she tuck him in with stories about brave horses and kind mountains. She discovered that singing to a child came easier than speaking to adults. Caleb's laughter echoed off the log walls like birds set free. Spring turned to summer. Wildflowers pushed through the clearing. Allora's bruises faded. She no longer flinched when the axe rang against iron wedges or when thunder rolled down the peaks. Some evenings she and Cole sat on the porch sharing strong coffee, watching Caleb chase fireflies. Words were few, but the quiet between them grew comfortable. One dusk in late August, heat lightning flickered over the ridges. Caleb slept on his pallet. A carved wooden horse clutched to his chest. Allora stood in the doorway, letting the warm wind touch her face. Cole was whittling on the step, curls of pine drifting around his boots. She stepped down, crossed a small space, and sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders brushed. He still but didn't move away. After a moment, she leaned her head against his upper arm. He let the knife rest. Neither spoke. Crickets filled the night. Autumn came. Aspen leaves turned the color of new pennies. One evening after supper, dishes washed and Caleb snoring softly, Allora found Cole at the table mending a harness by lamplight. She stood beside him until he looked up. Then, without hurry, she took his rough hand and pressed it flat against her chest, just left the center, where her heart beat strong beneath the calico of his sister's dress. "This is me saying yes," she said. Her voice was steady. "Not because you paid $3. Not because you saved me. Because I choose you, Cole Jarrett. Freely." His eyes, storm gray, always so guarded, filled, but he didn't let the tears fall. He turned his hand beneath hers, palm to palm, fingers threading tight. Outside, the first snow of a new winter began to fall, soft and silent, covering the place where an old gray dress lay buried. Inside, the fire burned bright. Caleb dreamed, and in the circle of lamplight, 3 hearts beat as one, held together by nothing more than kindness, and therefore priceless. Allora was home,